And we are live. Well, welcome everyone. Really excited to have another Athenium chat. Over the past month, at least of August, we were celebrating Athenium's third birthday, and we're just kind of extending it a little bit further tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sean Watkins. I'm the owner of Athenium Comic Art. We represent some of the best indie cartoonists around, one of which we have with us tonight. So excited to be talking with Rosemary Valero-O'Connell. You probably all know a bunch about Rosemary, but Rosemary's received 2 Eisner Awards, 4 Ignatz Awards, including Outstanding Artist in 2 consecutive years in a row, which is quite impressive. A Harvey, a Prism, a Society of Illustrators Gold Medal Award, and a Prince Honor. Her books include Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me with Mariko Tamaki, Don't Go Without Me, Golden Record, and The Stranger that she did for A2CAF here in Ann Arbor for our last year's festival. So welcome, Rosemary. I'm so excited to chat with you tonight.
Thank you. Wow, it sounds kind of cool when you hear it all set together like that.
You're kind of a big deal.
You're so nice to me, Sean. It's such a pleasure to be here. It's so lovely to be chatting with you.
So I thought, tonight we're going to have just a conversation here, and I thought we could start off with you just talking a little bit about your journey as an artist and sort of how you came to become a cartoonist.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm very lucky that my career has worked out in the way that it does because I was so tunnel visioned about wanting to make comics from probably too early an age. But I used to, I feel like a lot of folks my age have a very similar story of going to the library and reading as much manga as they could physically get their hands on. And I remember, I don't even remember how or when it happened, but when you sort of make the realization that, the book exists, which probably means it's someone's job to make the book. I think the minute that little kind of seed was planted in my head, which actually was kind of hastened by, I used to follow, he makes video games now, but this cartoonist, Max Schwartz, I used to read their live journal religiously. And I remember them posting about applying to SVA to study comics. And it blew my mind that was something that you could do. And I had the sort of secondary stroke of luck of having grown up in Minneapolis, which is one of the 3 cities, I guess, but one of the few places in the U.S., not including SVA in New York, that you can get a degree in comic art. And so once kind of the confluence of all those factors came together, and I was like, this is something I can do. This is something people do. I can potentially go to school to learn how to do this thing. That is the only thing, drawing and writing were the only 2 things that I ever really wanted to do. And so, marrying them felt like just the most, the way to just elevate, everything that I was making, everything that I wanted. And so I think it was like my freshman year of high school that I was like, I'm going here. I'm going to get a degree in comics. I'm going to be a cartoonist. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know what the day-to-day work of doing it was going to be. I just really wanted to, if there was a way that I could spend the largest number of hours in a day drawing, then that seemed like the clearest path to it.
Was your family really supportive of your artistic sort of inclinations, or was it more of a struggle to help them understand that you wanted to be a cartoonist?
It was, my family is really wonderful, and they were, I think, the exact right combination of very supportive and also very pragmatic and very realistic. So they were very much like, okay, you want to go to a private art school? Cool, that's wonderful. But my dad is from Spain, which is a country where the idea that you would put yourself thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in debt for any education is outlandish. And so they were like, we've got some money, we'll help you out as much as we can, but we can't, you better start applying for those scholarships now, which is what I did. And I'm very thankful for them for being so encouraging of yes, pursue your dreams, but also do it in such a way that you are saddled with the least amount of life-altering debt after you go into this very niche career where you will probably not make the most money. It wasn't like I was going to
Sure.
medical school or anything like that. But they were really very encouraging, I think partially because they just saw how fixated I was and how much time I spent doing this already, that they were like, you know what, she can try. And if it doesn't work out, there are a million other things to do with your life. But I'm very grateful. My parents have always been really, really wonderfully, like I said, supportive, but in a grounded way.
And it's worked out pretty okay thus far. So
I'm monumentally fortunate, and I feel very lucky that I've been able to, because I was very nervous, and they were nervous too. I mean, I
sure.
think understandably, it's not really the viable careers that they sort of saw were not, and so I do feel really lucky, and also very, happy that I'm able to sort of show them, like, look, I'm doing that thing I said I was going to do, and I'm, doing a pretty okay job at it.
Do you remember the first comics you put together? Was it something, did you ever do kind of self-published things, or were you, and what was your journey with with publishing?
Yeah, most of the first comics that I did were for assignments at MCAT, and I think the very first one that I printed and assembled, it was really great to go to a school like that, because we had this printing studio where you could go, and for zine making, it was fantastic because you could go to the paper depot, you could pick out your cover stock. I was printing on these like outlandish, just like sparkly cardboard, whatever, this like thick linen paper. I was making these like little objects. So it was self-publishing, but it was very like not what you would call a classical, like printer paper Xerox zine. I was trying to do the art object thing, even on a budget.
Sure.
But the longest comic that I made was this comic called If Only Once, If Only for a Little While, which I think was like a sophomore year project. And I was really on Tumblr those days, and I was posting all my work there. And it was, I think, like an 18-page comic, like, something that now feels really tiny, but at the time was like the biggest thing I'd ever done. And that was the first comic that I brought to shows, and that like I applied for little comics conventions with, and it was the first time that I was like, okay, I made something, and this feels like as clear, the most concise like version of who I am and what I'm trying to do at this juncture of my development as an artist. Here it is. $5, please.
That's super cool. So, and you had mentioned sort of the aesthetic or the art object kind of nature of what you were making, which, I think in the recent books that you've put out, Golden Record, like it's kind of like a piece of art, the book itself. Is that something you're really conscious of, the sort of design of the book and sort of how people are engaging with your art?
Yeah, I mean, I yes, but I also it's always something I wish I was better at. I think there are some incredible, well, do you know what I mean? There's
Sure.
cartooning and designing, and especially book designing, are such, very skills that dovetail, but I always wish that I was a little stronger at the book design thing, because some of my favorite comics that I own are the ones that just every centimeter you can tell has been considered. Every page, there's nothing that has not been chosen and looked over and combed over. And I think it's a beautiful thing because it's one of the joys of having an object and of having something that lives in a physical space and that exists outside of, I did a lot of sort of like digital self-publishing at first. And I think the real joy of being able to take something to print is that you get something beautiful to hold and something that has a tactile quality and all of this. So it is important to me when I get to control it. And I'm lucky enough that with, small press, especially like Golden Record, like you said, with Silver Sprocket, they're very, they really care about what the objects that they're making look like. And they really let their artists have so much leeway with sort of making decisions. And, all love to them.
Oh, that's what I love too. I think we'll talk maybe a little bit more about this later on and sort of you working mostly digitally. I think as a reader of comics today that grew up kind of in a boom era, or like kind of at the tail end of a boom era of comics, where they were very much leaning into like holograms and different covers and all these different things. there's something that like tickles, I think, a little bit of that nostalgia in being able to kind of hold an object. And it's interesting, sort of this art that's being created digitally, but I still prefer to read it in, physically in front of me. And there's the sort of joy of flipping through a book, which sounds so weird that we would be talking about like, books as like this sort of like antique thing. But I feel like there's a lot of pleasure in, particularly like speaking of Silver Sprocket and the sort of attention to detail, and you kind of know that as a team, the thought went into like, someone's going to open this book, right? And they're going to have it in front of them. And what is that experience going to be? I think there's something really cool to that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think as a creator too, seeing your work displayed or shown off with care and with that sort of elevated, it feels incredible to look at. I think especially with something like comics, where there's just so much time and labor that gets put in to make just the one object. You want that one object to sort of reflect a little bit of that immense amount of work and immense amount of care. You don't, I feel like we're always trying to counteract a little bit of the immediacy of how quickly consumable what we make is. And I feel like making it an experience to read and to hold kind of helps with that desire to try to really keep people in it for as long as you can.
Yeah. And how have you seen your approach to comics change over the years? So you talk about sort of being a consumer of manga and then going to college and sort of learning the sort of basics around comics and taking it into your own space and creating your own style. How have things changed in how you kind of approach your craft?
I think that, and this is probably just because I have, a few hundred pages of comics under my belt now, but I try to, it's interesting to talk about taking the thing that is like arguably one of the most important things in my life a little bit less seriously, but it has helped me be able to sort of reconnect with the fun and the pleasure of it to, I don't know. When I was first, like the first graphic novel that I ever did, Laura Dean, was such a pressure cooker and such a of my own making, really, of just, it was my first book. It was this very sort of, it felt like this massive opportunity that if I didn't put absolutely every like drop of blood, sweat, and tears that I had into it, that I was, wasting this like incredible gift that like luck had given me. And so I put a tremendous amount of pressure on myself, and that kind of, it didn't sap all of the joy out of the process, but it worked very hard to try to sap all of the joy out of the process. And I have found myself in this position where I am lucky enough that I get to wake up every morning and do the thing that I am naturally inclined to do, which is sit and draw. And I am very, very devoted to, as long as I'm lucky enough to being able to do this, to trying to make that, to really be in touch with like the gratitude that I have for what that actually is. I'm so formidably lucky. And so trying to make the experience of drawing comics as enjoyable as possible has meant a lot of just like loosening up on my own reins and taking it less seriously to be able to take it more seriously, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Did that pressure continue? I mean, so Laura Dean, I remember, I think I've talked to you about this before, but I feel like I read an article about this young up and coming artist that's going to be working on this book with Mariko Tamaki, and it's going to be amazing. And I feel like I read it it felt like 3 years before the book came out. And I remember seeing your art and being like, this is the most fantastic art I've seen in years. And so I'm like, bookmark. And the book lived up to the hype, in my opinion, and in the opinions of all of the awards it won, etc. But did you feel, so obviously a lot of pressure leading up to that, but, kind of coming out of that with your next project or projects, did you feel a lot of pressure to perform at that level again?
Oh, definitely. And I mean, I'm still kind of in that because I've put out shorter things, but honestly, the process of making Laura Dean, towards the very end of it, I was so overworked. I was so burnt out. Again, a lot of this of my own kind of making, but the amount of pressure that I put on myself was so tremendous that it took me a while to kind of recover from the process, like just what I had kind of done to myself in the process of making that book, and to kind of relearn how to make a graphic novel. And so I'm still kind of working on, my next project with First Second, which is will be the next sort of big graphic novel that comes out. And so there is, I do feel, I think definitely, and it's funny, there's both a more pressure at having had the first thing that I did come out to such, acclaim and awards, and it simultaneously puts a lot more pressure on the second thing, but also takes a lot off because I in some ways, and I don't mean this in a, I don't know. It's like I didn't think that I would ever winning an Eisner or like winning all of these, whatever, was the like, maybe I'll get really lucky and by the time I'm like 50, I'll have made something that's like good enough to be like slightly maybe considered by my peers or whatever. And so there is something a little liberating about having had the experience fairly young of hitting certain, and again, I think I'm the luckiest person in the world. But there is something about it, does take a little bit of pressure off, of being like, okay, well, I don't need to set this arbitrary standard for myself of success. I can just make something that I'm really proud of and try to work with integrity to make an object that I think is beautiful and tell a story that I really want to tell in as beautiful a way as possible. And if some people really like it, that's wonderful. But also, I've kind of been on the roller coaster of, the kind of big hit and and it was wonderful and it was incredible. And I'm incredibly fortunate to have gotten it. But I do feel a little bit of liberation of that pressure of both, I don't want the process of making a book to ever feel like that again. And I also am glad I did it. I'm glad I, poured my heart into it and got to sort of reap the rewards of that. Yeah. Did I answer your question or did I?
You did. That was great. And I think that's a wonderful attitude. I think, getting that praise early on can be sometimes, you get stuck, but I love the attitude of kind of like, well, I've done that now, so I don't have to worry about it. I think that's a great way of thinking about it.
And I think awards feel incredible, and all of there's a certain type of acclaim that really feels amazing. But I think more and more, and a lot of the people that I talk to in comics are feeling more and more connected to this idea of, I just want to. I come from mini comics and indie comics and all of that, where it's like, I don't really care about it being big and splashy and hitting all of these metrics of success. I would really like the people whose work I really like to like it. And I would like, I would like to be able to look at it, whatever I make in a few years, and feel proud of it and feel like I did the best I could at the time that I did it. And everything else is kind of gravy, because I just, the experience of getting to do this, like the day-to-day of getting to be a cartoonist, is the thing that I want and the thing that I strive for more so than, anything that comes after for the book.
Yeah. Do you prefer collaborating with folks on projects? Do you like doing your own kind of thing? Is it you love both of them? I know you've done both, obviously, but I'm curious kind of what, if you have a preference, especially now going through Laura Dean and having a little bit more freedom to do it, whatever you want now.
Totally. I mean, and I will say the freedom is my favorite part of this whole racket. And so, and obviously, I got into cartooning to be able to sort of tell my own stories. So I always, the thing I always come back to, and the big goal and the thing that everything else in my life kind of orients around, is trying to be able to make my own comics, where I write, I draw, I control every little part of it. It's just a thing that I get to be as obsessive and nitpicky and specific about as I want. But I've really, really enjoyed, and one of the books I'm working on right now, which I cannot talk about yet, I don't think, but I can allude to, is a story written by someone else. And working with the right collaborator is like such a pleasure and such a dream, and lets me sort of focus on different parts of, because again, that desire to nitpick and to control, I think, is both part of what I like about myself as an artist, but is also kind of, I think, one of my biggest weaknesses when it comes to my productivity and the quickness with which I'm able to produce a book, is that especially if it's my own, I will I will just redo every single part of it until I've made the book about 5 times. And there's something about working with another person where it's like, no, this part's done. This part's
Right.
finished. You just have to focus on speaking this language and translating it into this language, which is something that, there's also kind of a pleasure in having someone else just provide a beautiful set of instructions that you then get to build something with,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like this is a good segue into talking about the Golden Record, which I adore. It's a kind of unique object, I think, in comics world. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of how you came to that project. For those that don't know, it's a bilingual poetry book with illustrations. And I love it for a variety of reasons, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how that project came together and sort of, a little bit about that sort of background.
So it started as something that I had no intention of publishing, of making it. There was no need to have it coalesce into something that made sense, into something that it started, or a lot of the fragments of it sort of came together from the absence of me having a sketchbook and the absence of me sort of having an outlet for those impulses that were just kind of amorphous bursts of like creative energy, both in writing and in drawing. And because I think, I love the language of comics and of graphic novels, but I also really like the sort of parts, the 2 parts that constitute it. And I like being able to sort of dabble in both their marriage, but also them separately. And so I was looking for an outlet or just a place where I could sort of exercise all of these impulses to just draw freely and to just write freely with no, again, it didn't have to make sense. It didn't have to, it only had to make sense to me, really, which is a really lovely way to get to put something together. And I don't think it was until a few months, because it was a project I was doing on my Patreon where I would just sort of collect little bits and pieces. Like it's me going to my junk drawer basically and slamming everything together and being like, this is what I made. This is what's in my brain right now. And eventually I, through that process, which is usually the sort of benefit of keeping a sketchbook in that way, is that I sort of found myself circling a particular set of themes, a particular idea, just a particular type of visual exploration. And it sort of on its own ended up coalescing into something that felt like something of a unit of not necessarily of storytelling, but I just wanted to do something that was more experimental and that was a little bit harder to define than just a direct, a narrative. Because I do really like in my comics work to get a little more freeform, a little more lyrical, and this felt like sort of just the natural progression of that idea to sort of its final destination of just like, okay, we've broken apart the panel structure, we've broken apart all of it completely. It's just sort of this pool of words and images that you can swim in. Yeah.
Why was it important for you to have it be bilingual, so that there's parts of it in Spanish, parts of it that are in English?
It just kind of happened that way because, like I said, I was the only like judge and juror for this project.
Sure.
And so it was only, I was writing it for me, which meant that I was writing it in the way that I think, which is in English and in Spanish,
Yeah.
So it felt very natural that in a conversation with myself, I would speak to myself in the 2 languages that I speak. And I liked having that be a part of it. I like that it is, I like that it makes it both easier to read for some people and harder to read for other people.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite scholars was a woman named Gloria Anzaldúa, who wrote La Frontera, and her books are often poetry and prose and kind of a mixture of Spanish and English and stories, and she writes about the borders, right? Borders both physically and metaphorically. And what I loved about her work was that it was very much, you need to grapple with this where I am at. I am not in a position of power in the same way as patriarchy and all these things. You need to read this book in the way that I am kind of creating it for myself to share with the world and share my own experiences. And so I thought a lot about that as I was reading the Golden Record, as a kind of, us as a reader needing to join your world, right, and understand where you're at.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think it's the sort of formal qualities of it felt. The genre felt porous enough that it made sense that both, the sort of linguistic approach would also be a little bit more experimental and would have this sort of would transit kind of between two realms, English and Spanish and image and word and the combination of the two. It felt like, and again, it's personal. It's the most autobiographical thing I guess I've ever done. And so, like I said, it made sense to sort of include something or a feature of it that felt like it was mine and it was very me, and it made it sort of, I would like to do more bilingual things, honestly. And yeah, who knows if there is ever another Golden Record or anything like that, I think I would do it the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I also love that it's kind of pushing the form and, creating something that isn't necessarily unique in the sense that nothing like that exists. But I think often comics is kind of stuck in, this sort of form, right, of what a comic is and what it's not. And I love projects that sort of blur the lines, because ultimately who cares what it is, as long as in my opinion, as long as you connect to it in an emotional way, right? That's what I'm looking for as a reader, is I want to connect deeply to a text, to an artifact. And so I love that you're kind of playing with what comics can be or what comics should be.
And I think, I mean, thank you, first of all, but I do think that a lot of that is, I grew up, but my introduction to comics was, zines and indie comics shows and stuff, and a lot of self-published stuff, because again, you take commerce out of it and you take sort of publishing as an entity out of it, and people just get really wacky and really experimental and they don't have to worry about even necessarily communicating. They just have something that they want to express, and however they're inclined to express it, there it is. And again, they're the only arbiter, the only person who has to like it is them. But and those are always the works that I feel like I respond the most to, is something that so clearly was pulled so directly from someone's heart, and in a way where it just, it's they couldn't have made it any other way. And yeah, I don't know. I'm always, I feel like, looking for, and I respond the most to things that where it feels like the maker was allowed to indulge in experimentation without having to worry about being marketable or about being understood or about being anything other than just playing,
Yeah. What's it like working with Silver Sprocket?
It's a treat. They are genuinely one of the greatest, and I think every single person that works with them feels the same. They're just wonderful. They're just people that care so much about comics. Every single person on that team, every single person I've had any type of engagement with while I have worked with them. And I think it's very reflected in, like, people love to see them at shows. People love to, they're darlings of the community. And one of the reasons why I was able to do Golden Record with them and why it felt like such a natural home is that they just want you to make whatever book you want to make. And their editorial hand is very light, where like they will help you realize your vision to the highest degree that they possibly can, but they won't try to skew the compass of what your vision is. Because if they want to work with you, then they believe in whatever it is you're saying and however you're saying it, which is a wonderful feeling to get from a publisher. I mean, it's really fantastic to feel so thoroughly cared for by the people that are making your book. And like I said, they're very attentive both to the contents inside, but also to how it's produced and how it's made. I mean, I got to, pick out foils for the cover and do all these things. Like they're just wonderful. And I think, there's something to be said, especially when I've done publishing sort of on all these different scales, and there are different concerns, and it's a different process depending on how many copies you intend to sell. And there is
Right.
something so wonderful about working with a smaller press where it's like they're going to do their absolute best by your book, but the joy of making something really beautiful together is kind of the guiding light, rather than making something that will sell a bunch of copies to to as many people as possible. And it's really nice to be able to get to be incredibly specific, as niche as you want to be, as I can't say enough good things about it.
We're all big fans of Silver Sprocket
Yes.
here. So I always like to boost them when I can, and it's amazing to see them at like San Diego Comic-Con and talk to Avi about. I did a interview with Avi, and I talked to Avi a lot, but talking about just the response of Silver Sprocket, who's been going for a bunch of years, but now it's becoming the kind of hot, like hip, cool space to be at. And folks at this, a Comic-Con where you expect it to be more oriented to like movies and Batman and stuff like that, but folks flocking to the Silver Sprocket table is pretty exciting to hear.
Well, honestly, I think that's their reward for this thing that that I feel, and that all their other artists feel, is that faith and that trust in the people that they're working with to just do what they do really well. Like, I think they're really wonderful curators, but they are also, I don't know, there's you get work that people connect with really intensely when you let people connect really intensely with the part of themselves that is able to make work that's that personal, that's that specific, that's that, and you put fewer constraints on them, and you just, I don't know, elevate people in the way that they do. I think it makes a lot of sense that I'm very happy that they're getting such a nice return on sort of the way that they've invested in really not putting shackles on the creativity of the artists that they choose to work with,
Yeah, and I think it shows the sort of right priorities, right? I mean, I think it's a long-term project that I feel like I'm part of as well, which is, building out building out high quality books and projects, and people will come to it. And I don't think any of us expect to become millionaires off of, it'd be nice, but it's not going to happen most likely. But that sort of project of like, how can we do well by artists, make something that people are passionate about, and maybe do some good in the world, and hopefully be able to live decent lives too.
No, I think that there's something it's not a good thing that the ceiling for how much money a person can make in comics is as low as it is. I won't say that. But there is something about this sort of shared knowledge that we all have that, like you said, we're not going to become millionaires, probably. It does leave some space to be like, okay, then what are we doing here?
Right.
And why do we want to do this? And why does it matter to do this? Even if it isn't easy, and even if it does have, these financial complications or whatever. And it's because we really, 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 really care about comics. We really, really care about the people that make them. And I think people like you and Sprocket, who really stand in that and orient their, position in the community, and the way that you just engage with comics as a whole towards that idea of like, we just want this to be as fun and as lucrative for as long as it can. But what we really care about is just, these people that are making these things that make our lives better,
Yeah. And how can we make it sustainable? I mean, that's a lot of what Athenium is, which is that sort of pursuit of providing some assistance, financial assistance to artists that I love working with. And as well as, we have so many creative minds and folks from a variety of experiences and backgrounds and identities. And, I'm convinced, especially when I talk to Avi, like I'm convinced that we can solve some of these more systemic problems around not being a sustainable pursuit. If we can kind of build a structure where folks are here to support artists and to give them more freedom to focus on the work rather than worrying about all the other things, you know?
And you have, and I hope I tell you this, no, but genuinely, like the work that you have done through Athenium, and I can speak for myself fully here, but like this is what I live off of. This is what I do. This is the only job I've had since I graduated from school. I've been successfully unemployed for a decade now. But you have made the difference. And the what you have provided me, the connections, the things that you have provided to me through Athenium have made such a tangible difference in my ability to continue doing this, because it does a lot of times, it is like a year-to-year thing of just like, okay, what are we like? It looks different every single year. And so it's, I don't know. I always want to give you your flowers for that, because you've made a tangible difference in the lives of the artists that you care about. And not many people can say that, you know?
That's very nice of you to say. I want to switch gears a little bit. So A2CAF is coming up. It's amazing to think that you were here in Ann Arbor almost a year ago.
Yeah.
It's flown by. And so part of what I've been doing recently is a lot of kind of getting folks excited for A2CAF, Small Indie Press, part 2, year 2. So you were a headliner last year, which was amazing. So happy that we could get you out here and you could participate, and you made The Stranger specifically for A2CAF. But yeah, how was your experience with our little baby convention that we put on?
It was amazing. I mean, it was just incredible. It was from start to finish, everything from, again, that a show and a library would give me the time and the resources to make a comic for it is such an incredible gift, and not a thing that that was a very unique experience for me. But also the show itself was, every single person that I interacted with, every single person that played any role in the organization of that was so welcoming and was so kind. And again, it's that thing where you can feel the energy that people bring when they just really, really care about comics and about the community and about making it feel like an actual community rather than just a disparate gathering of people that all kind of have a similar interest, It felt very much like one of those shows, which is the pleasure of smaller shows, is that you get to feel that. If you want to talk to everybody there, you can talk to everybody there. You can really get a feeling for who is making what in this particular corner of the world, like what the Ann Arbor comic scene looks like, which I don't know. It's a really incredible to get to take that specific temperature city to city and to get to really see what people are doing in every little pocket of this pursuit. I don't know. I had a wonderful, wonderful time. I was one of the coolest experiences I've had with the show.
I'm really happy to hear that. It's funny. Part of the reason I helped start this thing was I say laziness. People make fun of me because I work all the time and never stop working. But I do. My background comes from, I think I get it from my dad in particular, but sort of this community-oriented mindset of you really plant your roots. And I grew up in a tiny town, and you knew everybody, and when someone moved, you would go with your car and you'd help them move. Like it was just a thing you did. And so for a long time, in kind of moving, going to college, being a perpetual grad student, I didn't always feel super connected to the spaces that I kind of inhabited. And so I make fun of, I don't want to have to go anywhere. It's nice to like be able to bike to a convention rather than fly across the world sometimes. But the reality is it brings me a lot of pleasure in kind of helping to pull together these communities, because I think, my experience of working with lots of different cartoonists, they're all over like in any kind of field, they're all over the place in terms of what they're comfortable with and extroverted, introverted. And particularly after the pandemic, or wherever we're at with the pandemic, thinking about bringing folks back together and encouraging those face-to-face interactions. I think it's really easy, even for me, to be in this office that I spend all of my life in my house,
I was about to say,
right, and not having those face-to-face moments that are really magical, right? Like can start a new project. You can connect with someone that's going to be a lifelong partner in comics world just by randomly turning around at some function at a convention. So I try and talk it up. I think some of it, there's some privilege to being able to attend these things. You have to have some money to be able to go, or be close enough to actually, like, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. There weren't a lot of comic conventions in Northern New York. But I think if folks can at all join those things, be in person, it is such a magical thing, especially for someone like myself who didn't always feel like I fit in completely. Like I could move between spaces really easily. It can connect with folks, but it didn't always feel like a deep sort of connection. I didn't feel like I was accepted in a lot of spaces. And then coming to this world where, in my experience, again, coming from lots of privilege, I was surprised at how open, especially indie comics, they're like, join us.
It's such a necessary part of the, like, what keeps the ecosystem running, because making comics is such an inherently isolated practice. I mean, I felt the absence of conventions so much more than I thought I would during the sort of peak of the pandemic, when they're not happening at all. I felt so cut off from this world and my world. And even though the process of making the books happens in isolation, the regeneration of the part of you that wants to continue to work in that type of isolation, for me at least, really happens at comics conventions. I mean, I've met a lot of my best friends, a lot of the, like, closest people. I can't speak highly enough. So much of the good that I have gotten from comics has been a direct result of being in these spaces with people and just sharing, doing the comics equivalent of breaking bread with folks. And just, it's one of my favorite parts about getting to work in this particular industry. And I think it's necessary. I mean, I think we all need a place in which to really feel the reality of what we're doing, and to look people in the eye and have them look at you and say, hey, this thing that you made, I really like it. I hope that you continue to make that, like, that's it. Like, that's the coal in the furnace,
And you got to go to Australia a few months ago for a show. I have this dream, as my sort of horizons expand a bit in comics world. I like, there's a scene in India that I want to check out. In China, there's I just want to go to all. I was in Paris a few months ago. I just want to kind of check out what these spaces are like, because it's its own unique thing, right? But what was it like to be in Australia?
I mean, that was honestly what you were just talking about was one of the most incredible parts of the whole experience, is that I was in Perth, which is it's in Western Australia, and it's like the most isolated capital in the world. So the scene there is incredibly, what's the right word for it? It's just it's so tight knit in a wonderful way, like in a way where it's just like, we are what we have, and we have this reach. We have, the incredible reach of, like, the digital world and all of this. And there were a lot of people from other parts of Australia that came to the show and everything. But there is such an impetus that every cartoonist that I met there has to really take care of and to nurture what they have there, because it feels so special and so precious and so, like, hard won and kind of hand grown. And that was an incredible thing to get to be a part of. I mean, one of the coolest experiences I got was Campbell White, who's one of the show organizers, also runs this comics school called Milktooth, which does a bunch of work with, I mean, they're basically raising, like, a whole generation of cartoonists in Australia. And I think they've been going for like a decade or something. Wow. But they are ushering in and sort of expanding the reach of comics in this town. And I got to see all of the work that, they have all these students that are, I think the youngest are like 6 years old. And then they've got high schoolers, and they're all making comics, and they produce them for them. And there was, Milktooth at a table, and all of these kids got to have books that they had made that they got to sell. And cool. It was amazing. And it's, in my experience, it was a lot of that sort of thing of, like, we know that we're not going to get we're not going to maybe be able to travel to the places like San Diego or New York or like do whatever. So we're going to make what we have here have everything we need. And we're going to make sure that it's special and it's solid and that we, take care of it. It was such an incredible experience. And it came about because another one of the organizers, we were in the same like bookstore in Tokyo a year ago. He recognized me from Instagram and we started talking and they were so nice. And they were like, oh yeah, we like run the show out of Perth, PCAF. I don't know if you'd ever want to come to Australia. And I was like, oh yeah, I mean, like, duh, of course I'd love to go. You're joking. So like funny. And then it just coalesced in the most incredible way. And I don't know, I got to meet a bunch of their other international guests and it was they did this really phenomenal thing, which I'd never been to a show like this before, where they have one day that's just panels and discussions and it's I think they called it Industry Day. And so everyone gets to, which is always my issue when I go to little shows, is that I want to see everything and I want to be present for all of the programming. But if you're tabling, you can't. And so they did this really nice thing where they separated it out. So it's like we have our market day where everyone's going to be tabling and there's some programming, but like, you won't miss a ton. And then we have our day where there are talks and panels and keynotes and all of this stuff. So you can go to all of it and you can be there. And it's great. It felt like being in school again, getting to like be in class with all of these folks, and you get to really meet everyone that's also attending. So I thought it was, PCAF, Perth, Australia. Everybody go to it. It's like a 24-hour flight to get there, but go.
I mean, yeah, I'm on board. I have it's funny where my like desire for international travel and comics are starting to like intersect.
Yeah.
And it's the best. I mean, if you can make it happen, or in an ideal world, pay for someone to someone pays for you to have these experiences. It's pretty spectacular.
I had a moment with one of the other invited guests, T. Bui, who's just an incredible cartoonist and who I was lucky enough to spend some time with when I was there. But we kind of had this moment where we were on Wajimup, which is this beautiful island. We took the ferry to get there. We were like seeing all of these little like marsupials running around. We were bathing in the Indian Ocean. We were doing all this stuff. And it was kind of like, can you believe that this is what we get to do because of and not in spite of this thing that we've dedicated ourselves to? I mean, it feels incredibly special when making comics somehow broadens my life in these ways that I had no expectation of it ever doing when I got into this, It's just, once again, I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to do things like that because of the thing that I love the most in the world,
Yeah. And I think, there's some privilege and luck and obviously lots of skill and talent that goes into what you're doing. But I think it's also, and it's probably a longer conversation, but I keep thinking about these artificial limitations in comics world that perhaps we place on ourselves. And I think, why can't this be more of an international space, right? Manga has been a thing that has taken over, that a lot of young people are reading instead of more mainstream comics. And there's so much more access to the tools to create comics than there ever was before. And I don't know, I just think that the folks that I'm most excited to talk with or to partner with are those people who are really kind of pushing the boundaries, or perhaps haven't necessarily come up through like traditional comic spaces. And they're like, yeah, why don't we go to Perth? And why don't we collaborate in these different spaces and do something that, is unique? Because I think the medium of comics is such a unique art form. This sort of combination of text and images, which goes way back, right? You can, way back to images.
We're connected to the cave painters.
Right. And images becoming words and language and things like that. But I truly, I'm preaching to the choir, of course, but there's something special to it. And I think that particularly in the West, sometimes in the States especially, we're sort of like, well, nobody likes us and it can only be this thing, when it really, in my mind, there is no ceiling per se
Mhm.
because there's such a huge audience out there that hasn't ever been exposed to it. And I'm convinced that
Mhm.
the more people that are exposed to these works, the more that we'll have that sort of upswell of
Yeah.
folks that not only buy the books but are also thinking of it as the art form it deserves to be
Yeah.
recognized as, you know.
And I do think that broadening of the medium's reach is happening even just in the time that
Yeah.
I've been, I live in New York, and lately every time I'm on the subway, almost without fail, there's someone reading manga. There's
Yeah.
a person sitting there with like a comic in their hands as like their book, their train book. I don't know. And it's, obviously I speak from an incredibly biased personal experience that this is a medium that can communicate things that no other medium can. But I do think that there is some objective truth to that a lot of people really respond to. And yeah, I agree with you. I think we have a lot of the limitations of the industry are, sort of artificially or arbitrarily imposed.
Yeah.
And I hope that the visionaries like you can help us punch through that.
I need a staff. I need a full-time staff. Um, so I wanted to get, with the time we have left, I wanted to get some of the questions that
Mm.
folks had submitted, and we have a few kind of process questions. And we haven't talked. We mentioned The Stranger, and one of the things that I was super excited about with that project, and it was sort of interesting from my perspective as your art representative, also working with the library and kind of like the in between,
Mhm.
kind of going back and forth with figuring out how to make it all work. It was I had a lot of fun, but it was like I have lots of different hats with this, and it's
Mhm.
great. But we got you to work traditionally, which you hadn't in a long time.
Yeah.
You mostly work digitally,
Mhm.
and so would love to hear a little bit about the process of The Stranger and sort of working in more traditional, ink and pen.
Yeah.
But as well as this question is just around kind of the tools that you use and how you are able to have so much detail in your comics and illustrations.
Well, I mean, it was refreshing and frustrating to return to traditional media, because one of the reasons that I work digitally, apart from just, time constraints, like it's just faster, um, is that I really enjoy, sometimes to my detriment, the experience of being able to sort of like search for the perfect version of a drawing, to be able to
Mhm.
redraw a line over and over again until I feel like I don't know, it feels like carving away at something sometimes to try to get to
Sure.
the ideal version of this page. And working digitally with sort of infinite possibilities makes it possible to be that horrendously and needlessly, finicky. But it was really kind of liberating also, in that when I don't have that option and I just have to be satisfied with the line, whatever line I
Mhm.
do, it's the first and only version of it. There was something really, there was a fascinating, I've worked traditionally before, but it's been a minute.
Sure.
And it was really kind of nice to have to focus and have to really, really like physically, like the focus that I have to put in is different, and just the way that I have to engage with the materials felt different. And yeah, I don't know. I'm doing a big sort of traditional ink commission right now for a mutual friend of ours. And it's really wonderful to get to. I find that the way that I draw changes when I have, those limitations versus, again, the sort of endless possibilities. But I really like that. I feel like I'm getting to sort of discover what my traditional style is versus my digital style. And it's kind of nice
Mhm.
to be able to, yeah, just adapt with the tools that I'm using. 'Cause yeah, my favorite thing to do is, detail in sort of a chicken fat, a professor called it once, but just the sort of endless little bits that fill up and kind of give life and complexity to an image. I think it's, again, that desire to kind of keep people. It's like a glue trap, like I wanna keep people in the image if I can, and I feel like giving them just so much to look at kind of helps do that.
I mean, they're gorgeous, obviously. I mean, how do you know when you're done? How do you know when there's enough detail? Is it just sort of like I need to move on? Like I can't do this anymore.
it's I can tell, like
Oh,
I know when a page looks unfinished to me, and I know when a page looks finished to me, and who knows whether that's something that would be readily like visible to anyone else, but I was just finishing this page for this project I was working on. It was that thing where I just kind of kept noodling at it until I was like, oh no, this is it. This is the page. Like, this is what it's supposed to look like. There's just a feeling of emptiness, or like an incomplete feeling that I just sometimes don't know until I hit it. Because sometimes it's very clear where it's like, okay, all the drawings are done. Everything is where it's supposed to be. But
right.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's a more innate thing than I really know how to express.
Interesting. So you talked about your kind of interest in manga early on. So we have a question around who inspired Rosemary to start drawing. She has such an incredible style, and I'm honestly blown away every time I see any art of hers. And I think a connected question is, so who inspired you, or what art inspired you? And then what are some influences outside of comics that inspired you?
Well, I remember Full Metal Alchemist was a really, 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 really big deal for me growing up, both because I just thought it was such an incredible story. But also because it was, I was reading Naruto. I was really reading sort of all of the big, shonen or whatever. And I do remember finding out that Full Metal Alchemist was drawn by a woman and being like, oh, that's the coolest thing in the world. That's like the absolute coolest. She's the coolest woman alive. And I don't know, that was important for me. That was an important kind of, little cornerstone. But I also, aside from manga, I did grow up reading a lot of, like Eleanor Davis and Jillian Tamaki were such big. I mean, Emily M. Carroll also. I remember reading His Face All Red for the first time, and it completely rearranging the furniture in my brain. That was one of the comics that made me really, really like understand that there's something you are able to do with this medium that is just so undeniable and so unique and so special. And honestly, there's still people that inspire me a lot to this day. But I was also reading a lot of shoujo. I mean, I read a ton of Clamp, which I think a lot of my visual sensibilities come from that, the sort of big, grandiose, hyper detailed layouts. The pacing of shoujo manga, I think, really influenced a lot of just like how I speak the language of comics now. I'm also a huge film person. I really like, I think most of my influences that aren't manga are movies. I'm a huge, David Lynch person, and Satoshi Kon, Gregor Araki, The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover is one of my favorite movies of all time, and those, I think, I take as much, again, because it's a medium that it's translatable to comics. They're two, sort of sister languages that they marry different types of communication and different types of storytelling to create something that is so much larger than the sum of its parts. So I feel like a lot of the inspiration that I get from comics or for comics doesn't necessarily come directly from them. It's sort of synthesized from all of these other places.
Do you have a favorite David Lynch film?
Oh, Mulholland Drive, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Is there any other?
No, honestly, and that's the thing, is when I say I'm a David Lynch film, I really mean I'm a Mulholland Drive.
I remember that film just exploding my mind when I watched it. And it was one of the first films, like, I can't remember. I feel like I rewatched it after taking some film courses in college. And I was like, I need to rewatch it. It's been a few years, but it was such a like transcendent moment and I feel like it's it's more accessible than some of his other films, but it's
Yeah.
also very obtuse, and
Mhm.
I think a lot of people misread it, but that's another conversation.
I had one of the most incredible, this was like in my first year living in New York, I think, where I got to go see it in 35 millimeter with
Ooh,
Rebecca Del Rio, who is the woman who, for those of you that have seen it, there's an incredible, arguably one of the most important scenes in the movie. She sings and she does this beautiful performance of the Roy Orbison song Crying in Spanish. And
yeah.
it's like a heart-stopping moment in the film. And she was there and she performed that
Wow.
song. And then I ended up like buying a headshot from her and chatting with her. And we ended up like going to get drinks at her hotel bar. And she's
That's
like the
amazing.
most interesting woman in the world. But it was, yeah, I don't know. Living in New York is fantastic. But
Yeah.
it's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Super cool. That's super cool. Let's see. I guess this is a good one to kind of start wrapping up with.
Mhm.
So you've talked a little bit about projects you're working on, some of which you can't talk about. Are
Mhm.
there projects that you can talk a little bit about with
Yeah.
us?
So I'm hoping that the one that I can't talk about, I think it will be announced very soon, and I
Ooh.
think it will be a very big, well, it's a big deal to me. But it's very cool, and I'm really excited for the pages I have finished for it. I think are like some of the better ones that I've drawn, and so I'm really excited for when we can talk about it. But I've also been working on the 12th house, which is
Yeah.
my sort of solo project with First Second, and I've been lucky enough that they have been letting me be incredibly, again, I'm people are probably getting the correct impression that I'm incredibly finicky and that I really, I'm a little obsessive and controlling with my work. Because it's a I guess a horror romance is how I have been describing it, but it's a story that has been sort of taking shape in it's the story that I like got into comics to tell. You know how a lot of people have
Yeah.
that thing, and I won't classify it as my magnum opus because it won't be. I hope to make many other comics after that will be better than it, but it's been a story that I have been cooking for such a long time that it's now the work I'm doing now is to sort of make it legible to people outside of me, to really shape it into something that is a solid unit beyond just, this thing I've been carrying around with me. But again, the pages that I've drawn for it, it's so indulgent and it's so just me doing everything that I want to do. And it's also, I feel like all of my short stories and all of my mini comics have been me sort of like sharpening
Mm,
this particular, the ideas that are present in this story. So it's me getting to just sort of work with a lot of the themes that I usually work with, but with the real estate of 400 pages rather than like 20. So I'm really excited about it. It's taking its time, but I hope that it'll be, I part of the experience of working on Laura Dean was also just like, oh, it's there forever. Once you publish it,
right.
that's what it looks like forever. So you better be real happy with how those pages turn out. And so I'm trying to be really happy with how the pages turn out. And I'm very excited. I mean, 2026 will probably be when it ends up coming out.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah.
I love that idea. That I don't know if this is exactly what you're saying, but those sort of precious ideas
Mhm.
that at least like I have my own kind of creative outlets and sort of thinking about processing
Mhm.
so my own stories in prose form, um, but not feeling ready to tackle something just yet, like
Mhm.
feeling like I need more time to kind of be in a space, to have the skills, to have the tools to really do it justice. And
Mhm. Yeah.
I think there's some truth to it being the thing that exists for forever. People go back and redo
Yeah.
things and whatever and do part twos and whatever. But I do think there's something to there's in my mind there's something beautiful to waiting for, not waiting, but sort of coming to that moment where
Mhm.
it feels right to
Yeah.
tackle something,
This has very much been a waiting for my skill level to catch up with my taste level type of thing of
Mm,
like, I'm I finally feel like I am the type of artist and the type of writer that can tell this story in the way that I had always kind of envisioned it. And to have
yeah.
done it earlier would have been to sort of, yeah, give a lesser version of it. But it's also that sort of fascinating thing that you run into when you've had a story kind of on a low simmer for a while is I'm a very different person now, and I'm a very different
Right.
artist than the person that originally kind of came up with the seed of this idea. So my priorities as an artist have changed, and sort of what I want to talk about and how I want to talk about it has changed. So it's been a really interesting experience trying to kind of marry the version of the story that I came up with and kind of do it justice, but also bring it into who I am now, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I am very excited to
Mm.
read it. I will pre-order it when I can in
Thanks, Sean.
2026.
Yeah.
Um,
You'll be
I
the
love
first to know whenever those pre-orders go out.
so excited. Well, is there anything else? We've gone through a bunch of questions. Is there anything else that you want the world to know, or something you want to talk a little bit more about?
Jeez.
Where can folks find your work is a good way to kind of.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I've been trying to sort of, with the internet kind of changing, I've been trying to figure that out. I'm mostly on Instagram these days, and I'm trying
Mhm.
to be a little more active there. I'm not so much on Twitter anymore, but I'm hi Rosemary Hello at just about everything, and I have a portfolio site that's got a lot of my work, a lot of my shorter comics. I also have a Patreon, which is kind of the best place to really see what I am doing. Um, Again, once this, I'm in the unfortunate spot right now where a lot of what I've been working on is sort of behind this NDA. And so I haven't been able to, but
Yeah.
there's a flood that's going to be unleashed on that Patreon once this project is announced and I'm able to be like, this is it. But
Very cool.
that's also, again, one of, I think, the better ways to just kind of like directly support what I do and keep me doing what I do. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's mostly.
I've been a patron of yours for it feels like years now. It's probably years now, and it's totally worth it. It's totally worth
Oh,
it. So
thank you,
I highly
Sean.
recommend if you aren't joining
You're
her.
one of the truest patrons of the arts I've ever encountered in my
Oh,
life. It's
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. Well, it has been such a pleasure speaking with you tonight. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're always working on like a dozen different projects, so I'm
Oh,
glad we
thank
were able to
you.
finally make this happen.
Yes, seriously. It's always such a treat to talk to you. And I'm happy 3 years to Athenium also. Again, I meant it when I said that you are making such a huge difference in the lives of a lot of people. But myself really at the like first and foremost, I'm so it's been nothing but a pleasure to get to know you and work with you. So I'm so glad we could chat.
Thank you, and thank you to the folks that watched live and the folks that will watch the recorded version of this chat. I probably won't be doing the like 2 a week, 3 a week interviews now that it's beyond our birthday. Although I could expand it to a full year, but I may die. Um,
Yeah,
but
take a
do
rest. Take a nice little rest.
I do like these. It's so much fun talking to you all. Like
Mhm.
sometimes we're all so busy. It's nice to have a reason to connect with folks. But
Yeah.
yeah, you can follow Athenium in a variety of spaces. Instagram is probably my favorite because Twitter is a hellscape now.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but we're trying to figure out new places to share. There's a
Mhm.
mailing list as well. Check out. We still have some originals,
Oh, great.
rare Rosemary originals on our website. So check those out. And yeah, thanks to everyone's support, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.